Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep dive into something, something pretty important, I think. How autism is shown in the media.
Mm-hmm.
How it's represented. And we got a ton of articles from you guys, which is fantastic, so thank you for that. We're trying to unpack some of the really interesting points
Yeah.
that they bring up. And one piece in particular kind of jumped out at me. It's called Why the Good Doctor Sucks. Tropes, Stereotypes, and the Erasure.
Hmm.
And it's from a website called Cheap ABA.
Okay.
And it's interesting. It's a pretty harsh, pretty strong critique of that show, The Good Doctor.
Yeah.
Which, as you know, is a pretty popular medical drama.
Okay.
And it got me thinking,
Yeah, no, it's really interesting you bring that up because it highlights, I think, a really common problem, a common way that autism is portrayed. And that's what this idea of the savant syndrome,
Yeah.
That trope.
Right.
So the main character, Sean Murphy, he's brilliant, a brilliant surgeon, has autism, and, on the surface, that sounds amazing, but what the article is saying is that this reinforces a very specific and
Right.
potentially even harmful idea of what autism is.
Right. It's almost like they took this superhuman autistic person and just like ran with it.
Yeah.
He's got this incredible memory, can diagnose like crazy medical conditions just like instantly and just like flies through surgeries.
Right.
I can definitely see why the author of that piece is a little,
Yeah.
concerned because it doesn't really reflect most,
Yeah.
autistic people.
Exactly. And to be fair, I mean, savantism does exist,
Right.
but it's not like a defining characteristic of autism. It's very, very specific, and a very small percentage of autistic people actually have it. So, shows like this, like The Good Doctor, and maybe their intentions are good, but they can end up kind of perpetuating this myth, and it really overshadows the just huge diversity
Right.
of the autism spectrum.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's like focusing on, one tiny piece of a giant puzzle
Yes.
and saying, well, this represents the whole thing.
Exactly.
But you miss like all the nuance and all the
complexity, yeah.
the complexity. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way before.
And we see these kinds of tropes in other movies and TV shows too. I mean, think about Rain Man.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was, groundbreaking at the time,
Yeah.
but it also really leaned into that savant stereotype,
Well, yeah.
which then kind of became, the main representation of autism for years and years and years.
So what do you think? How do these portrayals, how do they impact how people see and interact with autistic folks, in the real world?
That is such a great question.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something we have to really think about. If the only way that people are seeing autism is through these very stereotypical portrayals.
Right.
It can really lead to a lot of unrealistic expectations and a lot of misconceptions.
Mhm.
We have to remember that autistic people are people, first and foremost,
Yeah.
with their own, strengths and their own challenges
Right.
and their own unique ways of experiencing the world.
The article, it also talks about how the show portrays like just everyday autistic behavior.
Okay.
So it mentions Sean's awkwardness in social situations, his need for routine, and his sensory sensitivities.
Yeah.
And it frames those as like deficits,
Hey.
like things that he has to overcome.
Yeah. And that's where it gets, kind of tricky
Yeah.
because, those traits are part of the autistic experience, but
Right.
they're not, they're not bad, they're not wrong,
Yep.
they're just different.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of being in the world. But the problem is that when these things are always shown as problems, you need to fix it.
Right.
It just reinforces this idea that autistic people need to be fixed.
It's almost like saying you're not okay the way you are. You need to be more like us.
Exactly.
And that can be so
Damaging.
damaging.
In their self-esteem, their sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really about shifting our perspective, Instead of seeing these traits as like deficits, we need to see them as part of neurodiversity.
Right.
Each autistic person experiences these things differently.
Yeah.
And what might be, challenging for one person might be a source of strength for another.
This makes me think about what you said earlier about, how diverse the autism spectrum really is.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like The Good Doctor kind of misses that. They focus on one experience,
Right.
but there's all these other.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that's where the article's focus on the erasure of autistic women becomes really important.
Yeah.
There's not a single autistic woman on the entire hospital staff
Wow.
in the show, which is just, not realistic.
It's almost like they took this stereotype the kind of awkward but genius, white male, and just said, okay, now he has autism.
Yep.
And that totally ignores the fact that autism shows up, differently in women.
Absolutely.
Which can lead to people not even knowing.
Misdiagnosis.
Yeah, misdiagnosis, not being diagnosed,
Totally.
and just like a lack of understanding.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just gender, too. We need to see portrayals of autistic people of color, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds with all sorts of, strengths and challenges. And this is why those other articles you brought are really interesting, because they start to...
Yeah, that's a great point. Why don't we
Yeah.
dive into those now and see what else is out there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
One that I thought was really interesting focuses on autistic women in STEM fields, and it highlights how their unique ways of thinking, the ways that they solve problems, can be so valuable in those fields, but they still face a lot of barriers,
Yeah.
because of gender bias, because people don't understand their needs.
That's really cool. That one was fascinating. It made me think about, how we tend to think of STEM fields as like a certain personality,
Yeah.
like the lone genius who's like super analytical and maybe a little awkward,
Right.
But this article's saying, no, autistic women are like changing that and bringing a whole new
Absolutely.
perspective.
And it's not just about, challenging the stereotypes. It's that they're making these incredible contributions.
Right.
The article talks about Dr. Temple Grandin, who's, a really prominent animal scientist and also an advocate for autism. She's a great example of how autistic people can, really excel in STEM.
Yeah.
And really make a difference.
There was another one that I thought was really powerful, and it talked about religious trauma and autism.
Yeah.
And it was something I had never really considered before.
Yeah, that's such an important topic, and I think it often gets overlooked for a lot of autistic folks. The sensory overload, all the social pressures that come with religious settings, that can be really overwhelming, even traumatic.
Yeah.
The article talks about how, some religious doctrines can be so rigid, and that can really clash with the need for flexibility, the need for understanding that a lot of autistic people have.
Yeah, it made me wonder, how many, autistic people have been made to feel like there's something wrong with them because they don't fit in, in these spaces.
Right.
And it's, it's really sad to think that, their sensory differences, their social anxieties might be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Like a lack of face or even like a moral failing.
Right. And that kind of ties back into what we were talking about before about just, we need more awareness.
Yeah.
We need more understanding of just the diversity within the autistic community. It's not just recognizing all the different ways that autism presents, but also how it intersects with all these other parts of a person's identity.
Totally.
Gender, race, culture, religion.
You can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Exactly.
Everyone's different.
Exactly. And it's also important to think about, the language that we use when we talk about autism.
Yeah.
One of the articles that you sent dives into this whole debate about person first versus identity first language.
Yeah, I was a little confused about that actually.
Yeah.
Could you maybe break that down?
Sure. So person first language really puts the emphasis on the person before the diagnosis.
Right.
And so you'd say person with autism. Identity first language, though, puts the focus on autism as part of their identity.
Got it.
So you'd say autistic person.
Okay.
There's not really a right or wrong answer here.
Right.
Different people have different preferences.
So it's really just about respecting what they want to.
Exactly. Ask people how they want to be addressed.
Right.
And just being aware of those nuances can go such a long way in making things more inclusive, more respectful.
Totally.
The article points out that for some autistic people, using identity first language, it's like a way to kind of reclaim their identity and celebrate neurodiversity.
Yeah, it's like saying, hey, this is who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful message, especially in a world where, autistic people are often made to feel like they need to hide who they are or apologize for it.
Yeah. So it sounds like, the good doctor might not be getting it right. But these other articles, they're painting a much, much bigger picture
of
what it means to be autistic.
They really highlight, the challenges, the triumphs, the diversity, all those unique perspectives that autistic people bring.
Yeah, and it's really cool.
It
I'm
is.
glad we had the chance to look at them.
Me too.
Yeah, it's given me a lot to think about.
I think it's really important to remember that representation, it's not just about ticking boxes,
Right.
or including characters just to say you have diversity.
Yeah.
It's about portraying autistic people authentically,
Right.
respectfully, with a deep understanding of what they actually experience.
And going beyond those stereotypes.
Yes.
And letting all these different voices and stories be heard.
I agree.
Yeah. So now that we've talked about, how autism is shown in media,
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to think about like what we can all do
Yeah.
to support autistic people in our, everyday lives.
Yeah. That's so crucial. We can't just leave it to Hollywood,
Yeah.
to get it right. It's on all of us.
What are some like concrete things people can do?
Well, one thing is, educate ourselves
Right.
about autism and really challenge our own, assumptions.
Yeah.
There's so many great resources out there,
Yeah.
Online, in libraries. Seek out autistic voices. Look for perspectives from autistic people. Read books, read articles written by autistic authors.
Yeah.
Listen to podcasts hosted by autistic people.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like go to the source.
Yes.
You know.
Hear from autistic people themselves.
Yeah.
Another thing that's really important is to support autistic-led organizations.
Okay.
There are so many amazing groups doing such great work to advocate for autistic rights, to provide resources, to provide support, and to just promote acceptance and understanding.
And just on a, more personal level, we can all just try to be more mindful,
Yeah.
more inclusive in how we interact with autistic folks.
Yeah.
That might mean being a little more patient if someone's, struggling to communicate or understanding someone's sensory needs.
Yeah.
Or just asking them, hey, how can I best support you?
Right. And remember, it's always okay to ask questions.
Yeah.
If you're not sure about something, just ask. Most autistic people are happy to, share what they know and share their experiences.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's been really great, really insightful looking at all this stuff with you.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned so much.
Yeah.
And like it's also made me realize how much more I don't know.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing, right? There's always more to discover, more to understand, especially with something like autism, with such a wide spectrum of human experience.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious for you, what's the one big thing you hope people take away from all this?
I think for me, it really goes back to that idea that representation matters,
Yeah.
It shapes how we see things, how we understand ourselves, how we treat each other. And when we're talking about autism, having authentic representation, having diverse representation, I think it's just crucial to breaking down those stereotypes, to promoting acceptance, and to creating a society that's truly inclusive.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not just about like checking a box like, oh, we have an autistic character.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Now.
They need to be real people.
Yeah.
You
Well-developed, relatable.
relatable. Yeah, and show all the different ways that
A range of experiences.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's not just in movies and TV. It's in everything, right?
Yes.
It's making sure that autistic people, their voices are heard.
Yeah.
At school, at work, in their communities, in the decisions that affect their lives. We talked about, listening to autistic people, supporting organizations that they lead, educating ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What else can people do?
One thing we didn't really get into yet is advocacy.
Okay.
If this is something you really care about, think about reaching out to your elected officials and advocating for policies that really support
Right.
autistic individuals and their families.
Yeah, we can all make our voices heard.
Absolutely. And remember, I think, change starts with each of us.
Mm-hmm.
It can be small things like educating ourselves, having those conversations where we're respectful, challenging those misconceptions that we see,
Yeah.
and it can have a ripple effect.
So as we sign off today, I kind of want to leave folks with something to think about. We've talked a lot about moving past the stereotypes
Mm-hmm.
and making space for those authentic stories.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we as a society make sure that autistic people aren't just like represented,
Well,
but that they have the power to tell their own stories?
That's a really great question.
Yeah.
And I hope that's something that people keep thinking about,
Yeah.
long after they finish listening.
Mhm.
Because making a world that's truly inclusive for autistic people, it's about more than just representation.
Right.
It's about empowerment, it's about equity, it's about really respecting the worth
Yeah,
and the dignity of every person.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We hope it's given you some new things to think about, and that
Yeah.
you'll keep learning and engaging with those with
Absolutely.
this important topic.
Until next time.